Let's start with Dr. Rodriguez.
Good afternoon, everyone. I have a 13-minute, no, just kidding, 5 minutes. Keeping in line with the theme of the session, which is evaluation approaches and methodologies, my comments will focus mainly on the methodologies and the approaches in the different presentations. So let me just say something briefly about the presentation of Director Encarnacion. It's very difficult to comment on this because I'm very familiar with the work. So let me just say that I think what NSCB is doing in terms of providing more disaggregated data to be more responsive to the demands of the various stakeholders is very laudable. I think, and as Director Encarnacion has pointed out, the challenge really is how to generate this disaggregated data in a more timely and frequent manner. So she was mentioning about generating, for instance, small area estimates for poverty to be used for the NHTS in 2014. But I think the estimates that will be provided will be only for 2009. Is that correct? So the challenge really is how do you provide more timely statistics, and I think that will be a recurring challenge for all of us here. I just have one question regarding the statistics presented, which is on the numbers presented on the poverty incidence amongst fishermen and farmers. Because I know that poverty incidence is actually classified based on the family. And so do the numbers, the 1 million plus, represent only the individuals who are categorized as fishermen? How are the members, the family members of these fishermen or farmers categorized? Are they necessarily categorized as part of the farmers group? So that's just one of the questions. And I guess a greater challenge really for the Philippine statistical system is how to disseminate these different types of information so that the users would know how to use them correctly. It's really, it takes, although Chesa presented it very nicely to all of us, I think it requires some capacity to be able to understand really how they use these statistics and for what purpose can you use them. Turning to the second paper, I don't have any expertise at all at this water. Okay, but let me just probably say something in terms of, I think the indicators or the rating scale used. The presentation showed the rating scale used to assess coaching and mentoring schemes, and I was expecting, I think, a bit more quantitative measures of success or impact to facilitate assessment of these different coaching or mentoring skills, but I don't know whether these are available or not. Now, I think for the third paper, Dr. Yunson, I think this is something very interesting, and I think something I'm surprised. I'm sure if there's somebody from UNDP here, they would actually have questions. They would readily respond to this because the finding is very controversial, saying that the commitments to MDG has had no impact on poverty reduction. I'd just like to mention probably that I think commitment to the MDGs across countries took on different, I think, magnitudes or degree of operationalization. And so I think that's the challenge when we do a cross-country study, pulling together the data from different countries, because committing to the MDGs may just mean lip service for some countries, but for some countries it actually meant reallocating your resources to be able to achieve the MDG goals and targets. And I think the main point here is that she tried to control for growth by using growth elasticities. But I think there are other, there's recognition, I think, among countries now that direct assistance or support to the poor may not be that effective in terms of reducing poverty. So there's recognition that you need growth to be able to reduce poverty, and that's why I don't think we should take it against countries if they focused on growth, in addition to other direct assistance to the poor in terms of reducing poverty. So I think controlling for growth and saying that because you don't find that difference in growth elasticity allows us to make a conclusion that the committing to the MDGs has not had a positive impact on poverty reduction in terms of accelerating poverty reduction. I think there are many other factors that affect this elasticity, and I think that's why I think to better understand how MDG commitments has impacted on accelerating poverty reduction, this study could be complemented perhaps by doing it on a country level to take into account how the commitments have been operationalized, and other factors affecting the domestic economy could also be incorporated. Now turning to the fourth paper, which is I prepared more detailed comments because I had a full paper which is 60 page long, so I had more materials to work with, but I'll just focus on some aspects of it. I think we've heard all along this morning what the goals of impact evaluation are. It's really to assess the impact of the program towards improving the implementation of the program, and so that's one. You want to determine the impact of the program for possible replication or scaling up, or you want to draw lessons for formulating similar programs. It's very important to keep this in mind because this would have implications on when you want to do your evaluation. So if you want to improve the implementation of the program, that means you do it while the program is still ongoing. You know, if you want just to draw lessons, and I think you can do it afterwards. And I think that's when, after the program has been implemented. So this would have implications on when you want to do your impact evaluation. So for TIP, if I understand it correctly, it has been completed. Yes? So it's really more for drawing lessons for, is that correct? Drawing lessons for formulating similar programs. Next. Now for the short-term impact, the paper actually looked at the national achievement test. I have some specific comments here. So why not also look at performance of students in class? Also, given that one of the objectives of TIP is to improve access to elementary education, it's important also to look at the impact of TIP on other school indicators such as net enrollment rate and attendance rate. In terms of long-term impact, I guess what's the primary objective of looking at migration as a way to evaluate the long-term impact of TIP? I've been trying to grapple with this issue. What is the hypothesis being tested? Does the study look at the increasing migration rate as a positive social return to TIP investment? Are we saying that we expect migration, or we're encouraging the students to migrate? So it was not very clear to me. The time of evaluation, what's the basis for the time of the evaluation? 2 years for short term and 6 years for long term. Basically, I'm identifying some issues that I think would be relevant for us who are planning to do similar evaluation, because I think you should read the paper because the paper has been very candid in terms of the challenges that the team has faced in terms of implementing this evaluation. So the second is, isn't it too early to evaluate the long-term impact of the program, specifically the labor market outcomes? Take note that it was implemented in 2006, and so your students, your cohort is actually what, below 20 years old, so might be too early to look at the labor market outcomes. Selection of comparison groups, provincial, and it actually looked at, chose some provinces to compare your TIP divisions, and also it also selected some households to be able to compare, well, actually individuals to compare your TIP and non-TIP students. Although the paper was 60 pages long, there's actually a need to better describe the criteria used in selecting the sample provinces? And how did the team ensure the comparability of the treatment and comparison groups? So for instance, they chose adjacent provinces. So Ifugao, Nueva Vizcaya was chosen as a counterpart for Ifugao. I guess it would be better for us to learn from this paper to know exactly which socioeconomic characteristics were examined and how comparable were they. Next. Okay, short-term impact. Given that peak placement was non-random, one way of coming up with a good comparison group may be to match the peak and non-peak schools using a set of socioeconomic and school-related indicators, including but not limited to income class of the municipality where the school is located, school-age population, net enrollment rate, cohort survival rate, completion rate, pupil-student ratio, and so forth. And this could probably be available. This data could probably be available. In fact, during the presentation, the ASEC Matt actually was very candid in saying that the baseline data was actually contaminated. And so I think the challenge is, so this is a very good learning experience. If you have a contaminated baseline, it's very difficult to be able to make the attribution or the impact later on. Long-term impact, what's the reason for selecting only the relatively poor municipalities? It might also be interesting to find out the outcomes in higher income municipalities with less improved schools in terms of facilities, instructional materials, teachers' competence, among others. The report does not provide an explanation on the criteria used in selecting the sample schools. Also, why total enrollment greater than 120 was used as the cutoff in selecting the schools. So what's the basis for the 120? Next. Again, on the sampling design, why choose 15 schools per intervention division but only 10 schools per non-intervention division? Why not 15 in both areas or 10 schools per division? In Antique, why purposely selected 2 schools that were affected by flash floods? So basically, I just have these questions when I read through the paper. There seems to be no explanation also on the number of sample students. Why choose 15 students from school year 1999-2000, but 20 from school year 2004-2005, and 2005-2006. Next. I was hoping that I would see how the sample sizes were derived. What's the power of the statistical test given this sample size, given that the conclusions actually were not very good from the not very good from the point of view of peak, because it did not find significant impacts on males, just on females. I was hoping to find more of these technical descriptions. Next. So this is just in case there are statisticians here aside from the ones in this table. So I included a slide on the power of the statistical test. I was hoping to see some power size calculations. Basically, we wanted to be able to see what would be the probability that the test will reject the null hypothesis. So we wanted some confidence in terms of how to interpret the results that we're getting. In impact evaluation, it's ideal to use true panel data. It's better to use data on pre- and post-intervention characteristics of and or outcomes for the same set of students. Unfortunately, although it was supposed to be built into the design of the program, this was actually not done. Also, the quality of the data. The survey was conducted. Remember, there's a tracer survey. They tracked the students in 2011. So a survey was conducted in 2011, which gathered household information for 2000 also, because they did not have baseline data. They also tried to get information for 2000 during the survey in 2011. So I think you could understand the problem of recall when you're asking for information 10, 11 years ago. So it would have been better to have this baseline data. And I guess I'm pointing this out because I think it's very important to integrate the M&E component when you're designing a program. It should not just be an afterthought, but really an integral component of the project or program. Thanks. In the econometrics part, although it's over, I think what I'm just saying here is that it would be quite, it might be useful to include some other variables in addition to what they already have in the models, and also in terms of the goodness of fit. It would have been interesting to see a classification based on the estimated logic model showing the actual versus predicted peak placement to gauge the performance of the model. Next. Okay, on the propensities for matching, can you skip? Yeah. Next. Okay, again, this is for the econometrics part. There could be some other regression techniques to take care of the potential heterogeneity problem. Next. Okay, the specification for the schooling equation is the same as that for the migration equation. However, the set of factors affecting the schooling outcomes might be different from the set of factors affecting migration. I know it's quite easy to do a regression with just one click, but perhaps, you know, more, I think more relevant variables could have been incorporated for both equations. It's not implicitly stated in the report the reason for not including some factors that have potential effect on the outcomes of interest. Is data and availability the primary reason? Because if you look at the specification, you would always find, okay, perhaps they should have added this variable because this is based on theory would have affected this outcome. But I suppose it's the unavailability of the data that was the primary reason for not including some of these variables. Just one slide on the results. It's important to understand why non-peak cohorts seem to perform better than peak cohort in terms of years of schooling, high school repetition, college entry, and salary. That's table 5.2 in the paper, which was also presented here this afternoon. The regression results show positive impacts on females but not on males. And so I guess the question really is, what could be the reason for this? Because I think in terms of designing future programs, this is very important to understand. This kind of program works for females, but it doesn't seem to work for males. So I guess the question is why. So concluding remarks, many of the challenges, problems could have been addressed by integrating the M&E component in the project design. So I guess that's why we're all here in this network, it's really to learn from all of this. And I think right now we would have realized that it's really very important to have that design at the start and not just an afterthought. And I think one important implication would be on the existing monitoring systems. For instance, the paper quotes mentioned the data coming from DepEd administrative data, but there was a lot of work needed to make it useful for the evaluation. And so I think what will happen is that as we develop this culture of M&E, existing monitoring systems, whether they are administrative records or survey data, may need to be enhanced to facilitate generation of data for monitoring and evaluation. And lastly, I think it's important to point out that we need to build the capacity of not just national government agencies, but also LGUs in monitoring and evaluating projects and programs, even if they may not be as big as this program. You know, even just, I think if you want to develop a culture of M&E, we should start teaching, for instance, LGUs, how to monitor and evaluate even a 1 billion project. So I guess the challenge is, how do you develop that system, M&E system, such that it is cost effective? I'm sure if we look at the cost of many of these evaluation, they are not small. Because you need to do it, you need to follow people, you need to do a household survey. And so I think the challenge really is, how do we develop this M&E system such that they are cost effective? Thank you.
What I'm going to say next may have been answered in the slides or papers that were sent to you all, which was I got my copies yesterday, and I didn't have the chance to read them all. Anyway, I will be raising my comments based on the perspective of impact evaluation. And probably you know what it means. It's actually trying to estimate what part of the observed outcome or impact that can be attributed to the intervention itself. So I'll be raising my comments along that line. So in regard to the first paper, well, it's not really an impact evaluation study per se, but the kinds of data that you can use to do impact evaluation of local development projects, if you want, and their impact on poverty. Right now, the NSCP can be commended for providing us with disaggregated city level, municipal level poverty estimates for at least 2 years now. But what we also need would be disaggregated right-hand side variables if you're running a regression. Because the kind of data that we have now, correlating poverty reduction on the left side and other indicators on the right side may draw out misleading policy implications. For example, suppose you see, poverty reduction is greater among cities rather than on municipalities. What does it mean? Is it because the city, as a local government unit, does well in improving the poverty in their locality, or is it because of the local economy, rather than the local government itself, that drives the reduction in poverty incidence? Right now, we don't have that kind of data that would allow us to piece out two possible hypotheses regarding whether it's the local economy or the local government itself that is more effective in reducing local poverty. So, we need also those kinds of data. With regards to the next paper on water, it's not really an impact evaluation study, right? Because what in impact evaluation literature, what you have is a single observation. That is the ex-post outcome that you observe. You don't have a before, you don't have with and without. So it's very hard to piece out whether the mentoring or the whatever intervention that the group has made is really the causal factor for the effect that we observe in the areas where they intervene. Because we don't have a comparison, essentially. So maybe they have the data in their own office to show that what were the conditions before they intervened, or what are the conditions in other areas where they did not intervene, and make the proper comparison to draw out the real impact of their intervention in the selected areas. The third paper on the MDG tries to link the effect of the adoption of the MDG to poverty reduction using the 10-year period before the MDG adoption and the 10-year period where the MDGs were adopted in the sample countries. But if you look at the MDG goals, these are more interventions targeted to children. When do you see an impact on poverty reduction if these interventions are more targeted to children? Maybe when the children become adults, right? I mean, if I immunize the children now, what will be the impact of better health on poverty reduction? It won't be now, or those children. It will be 10, 20 years perhaps later. So perhaps the reason why we don't see the impact yet of MDG is because the lag or the time period is still too short to observe the effect on those children who benefited from some of the MDG interventions. It's not because the MDG per se is not good, but because it has a lag effect. And the time period we have now is still too short to measure those possible lag effects. And if I may add as well to the point made by Dr. Reyes, is that we should also differentiate the countries according to their intensity of commitments to the MDG goals. And the sad part is that the commitment to MDG goals is also endogenous, right? If you expect the donors to come in and to provide you all the support, provided that you swear to swear to allegiance to the MDG, declaration, then you might. So it's not because of the MDG per se, but because of something else that drives the observed result. The identification study, the way Dr. Son now identifies the impact of the MDGs, to essentially differentiate two time periods, right? Before the MDG and after the MDG. But the danger of doing that is that you're saying essentially that there's only one thing that differentiates these two time periods. It's the MDG. What happened essentially between 2000 and 2000? A lot of things has happened between 2000 and 2000, even within the MDG period, right? Some countries are exposed to Asian crisis or world crisis, some are less exposed to ocean crisis, and they have had adopted various measures to cushion off the effect of all these global or even, their own macroeconomic crisis. So there are a lot of variations, even within the same time period, across countries that we're not capturing yet in the way we try to measure the impact of the MDG. So the other thing is that I haven't read the paper, but my first impression when I see the regression equation is that why are you estimate two essentially regression equations? Why didn't you just use one pooled or panel data estimate and just have one time intercept, which is essentially what you're measuring, and then you don't have to compare the estimated coefficients of two time intercepts and test the significance of those of the differences in the time intercept. I mean, you probably have the answer in the paper, but that's just one of the things that struck me when you presented the regression equation. The fourth paper is, to my mind, the closest to what you would call an impact evaluation study. It's a brave attempt to do an impact evaluation of a very complex, very complicated, sector-wide intervention after the fact. And it was mentioned in one of the slides, they mentioned a lot of caveats. The baseline is contaminated, we cannot perhaps possibly program placement bias, so forth and so on. And then they proceeded anyway to do all these estimation procedures and draw conclusion from this from the results of the study. Actually, to my mind, the main conclusion would be, one, is that how difficult it is to do an impact evaluation ex post when the impact evaluation wasn't really a part of the original design. I think that was also a point made by Dr. Celia-Reyes. It's hard to retrofit everything ex post. Go back. What would have happened had you designed or done this baseline before the evaluation? It's very difficult to do that. The other lesson that probably would have been nice to see is that given that the biases, the estimates are biased, what's the direction of the bias and how much confidence can I get from these biased estimates? Is there something that can I believe regardless of the bias estimates that are shown there? The way they were phrased now, it is as if there's no bias because I've already claimed that my estimates or my data are faulty in the beginning, and therefore having admitted that, accept anyway the results that I present. It shouldn't be like that, right? I mean, you present the results, you set the caveats, and they say, oh, the possible direction of the bias or the size of the bias is such and such. And then the policy conclusion can, or the policymakers or stakeholders can make their decisions whether to accept or not accept whatever estimates that you present to them. But overall, I'm glad to be here and be provoked to say something about about all these studies. And I congratulate and thank the organizers and the presenters for an afternoon well spent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Capuno. Before I will read these thousands of questions here, may I invite the speakers to have a quick rejoinder or response to the comments by the discussants, starting with Director Encarnacion.
Thank you to Dr. Reyes and Dr. Capuno for your comments, and of course, we sincerely appreciate your expressed appreciation of our efforts to produce these small area estimates, particularly on poverty. Just on the points raised by Dr. Celia Reyes, yes, I think really it's the challenge of the Philippine statistical system to provide more timely and more frequent poverty statistics. And just to share to the group, just recently, in more recent months, through the Secretary of the NEDA, Dr. R.C. Balisacan, there have been stronger push to have more frequent, more disaggregated poverty statistics by coming up with annual family income expenditure survey. Because right now it's triennially conducted. If we have an annual FIES, we can have more timely poverty statistics. And the NSCD, since back in 2003, has always committed that once we have the complete data file for the production of poverty statistics, we have always produced poverty within 1 month upon the provision of data file. So I think it is one great development with support from the NEDA to come up with more frequent and more timely poverty statistics. And secondly, on the clarification of poverty incidents, farmers and fisher folks, basically it was computed by coming up with characteristics at the household individual members level. So meaning from the LFS, each of the members' occupation group was identified, and from that becomes the selected total population for the farmers and fishermen. So it's not really the characteristic of the household, but more of the individual level characteristic. And the third and last point of Dr. Celia Reyes, the PSS, the greater challenge is to how to disseminate this to capacitate users. And I think in the Philippine Statistical Development Program that we are currently implementing, what really the challenge is not just disseminating, but really communicating poverty statistics. Because we have had many reactions and as to the numbers that we are producing, and we have to really communicate what the numbers tell us and how these are actually computed. And one of the efforts really of the NSCD is to come up with more practical articles, such as the Statistically Speaking article, Beyond the Numbers, and the more recent Sexy Statistics. I could have hoped it's Sexy Statisticians. So we've come up with that, and it's really an attempt to really communicate what these numbers tell us. But really, it's just a small part of that big challenge. But as we have always said, when we talk of statistical capacity building in the NSCB, we believe it's not only at the producer side, it's always a producer and the user side, because it's not only in the generation, but as always we have stressed, it's on the actual policy uses that we really feel that we become relevant. So actually in the NSCB, we received many requests for technical assistance, for trainings, for presentations, but sometimes we had to say no to some of this simply because right now we cannot say no to NEDA and UNICEF, of course. So, but really in some of the invitations, we had to say no simply because before, when we were just producing national regional poverty statistics, there were like 10 people doing poverty plus other sectors. But right now, we only have 3 people doing poverty and the other sectors. And these are now down to city municipal level estimates. So definitely, that's what we've been saying. Demand for statistics, particularly in poverty, has been increasing exponentially. But really, at the end of the day, we need manpower to be able to also help our users of statistics. And on the point of Dr. Capuno, I think there's one point on the right-hand side of the equation, right? Well, we have provided information on city municipal level poverty statistics. Yes, coming up with the left-hand side, it has been a tedious process as well for the Philippine statistical system. We had to make do with what we have in terms of existing data files. But I think that's the reason why at the end of our presentation, we have to highlight, I think this was also highlighted by Dr. Reyes, the role of the local government units, because we cannot always, the small area estimates, it depended on the census data. And census data, you can only have that every 10 years. And definitely, if you talk of more timely, we cannot just rely on census. So we have to have more frequent city municipal level statistics, and we have the community-based monitoring systems as spearheaded by Dr. Reyes, and now the more recent National Household Targeting System for Poverty Reduction. But take note that this does not cover all municipalities of the country. Hence, I think that's the point we're raising, that LGU should really be capacitated strongly so that they can help us in supplementing all this data information needs. Thank you.
Has deteriorated and in a very bad way, because there has been no technical assistance, or the knowledge of maintaining and operating these systems are lacking. So the project is really the objective is to identify the best way to sustain those infrastructure projects, water supply infrastructure projects, through capacitating the users, the operators. And we try to identify which are the practices that could possibly sustain operate and sustain those systems. And one of them is that we identified mentoring and coaching, coming from more experienced operators to the less experienced players. Those are coming from the barrios, which have a small water systems. Yes, that's true. We don't have what you call data and what's happening before those practices are that we have now. That's one of the limitations of the study. But what we did is to compare what are those, to identify first what are the existing practices in mentoring and coaching in water supply. So we identified them, and what we can only do is to compare its relevance, its effectiveness, as well as success. That's the only thing that you can do without the data, the baseline data that we have. And that's what we did. And the conclusion that we have is that to make a recommendation which one is most effective, the most sustainable, and the most that we can support based on the existing practices and culture of the people in the water supply system. And I think that we did that. It's not the usual impact evaluation, but compare which is the most effective that the government should be able to support and sustain given the existing conditions that we have in the system. Thank you.
So we only have few questions left. First, for Mr. Montero, how are the national government agencies like LUA, NWRB, and MEDA collectively encouraging LGUs and local Watson associations to take on the driver's seat in managing their respective water supply systems?
That's not part of the study, but I can only surmise that by providing them with the various options, they're not given the options whether to borrow from LUA or to borrow from banks. It's also possible, depending on their capacity to the viability of the proposals that they have. So it's a mixture of many things that they can avail, depending on the viability of the project, the number of possible users, as well as the viability of the source and treatment that they have. So it's another study, I think, provided by USAID, if not mistaken, that can answer that question. But basically, it's that they're given options based on the viability of the proposals.
One more question. What are the outcome targets
of the study? The outcome study is to recommend which is the best practices with the best practitioners, the best framework of mentoring and coaching that can be sustained to based on the experience of the practitioners in the sector.
That we did. Okay, we will now request Director Encarnacion to stay in the podium. You have lots of questions here. Dito ka sa taas. It's a unique organization in terms of the services it is mandated to deliver compared to, say, NEDA, DSW, etc. Do you currently have an M&E policy and framework or system as a government agency? I think you mentioned this in the PSD. I'll let you answer the questions one by one. There are so many.
I should have left with just material. I should have said I have a Senate hearing.
Then you lie.
No, I was just kidding. So, the first question on M&E policy framework or system within NSCB. I think what we're trying to do, admittedly, it's really one of our big area of improvement in the NSCB, and not only in the NSCB but also in the Philippine statistical system. Because we believe there are many statistical policies, statistical systems, statistical classification standards, but really there is a strong need for us to really closely monitor the implementation, the compliance to this kinds of systems. That's why we actually, as mentioned earlier, we have included it in the Philippine Statistical Development Program. But as I mentioned, it is a system, it is a plan. At the end of the day, the implementation will be a question because there will be resources needed and there's no M&E. Honestly, there's no M&E specialist within the NSCB. It's something that we are doing it's almost an on-the-job training, and there's no M&E unit particularly within NSCB. So I think it's one of the area wherein we strongly need resources in terms of really institutionalizing it, because at the end of the day, we are coordinators of the Philippine statistical system, and really it's part of our mandate to monitor their compliance, their implementation of these statistical policies.
Being part of the past PSTP, I think this is still an improvement that at least in the plan we included monitoring evaluation system. Okay, what does the NSCB mean in its use of the term evidence-based?
So when we say evidence-based, we always put it alongside with policy making, decision making, or for example, even program implementations. Meaning, when you try to design programs, when you try to make policies, when you try to make decisions, this should be based on evidences, meaning there should be statistical information supporting why you are choosing that area. There is statistical information why you are delving into this sector when you try to do programs, why you try to prioritize these areas. And I think that's one of the key qualifier always when we always cite policy making and decision making. It should be evidence based, meaning there is facts, numbers, figures supporting your decisions whenever you make interventions.
How is NSCB approaching the DBM in terms of resource provision for the national government to start to continue to enhancing the capacities of NSO and NSCB? Maybe they're referring to MFOs or something.
How NSCB is approaching, firstly, PSS-wide. As coordinator of the PSS, I think one improvement of the Philippine Statistical Development Program is that now, aside from the program, we have a supplementary or complementary medium-term expenditure framework, and we would like to express our appreciation to DBM in helping us come up with such an expenditure framework, because at the end of the day, we have these programs and we are often asked, how much would you need to implement this, or what resources would you need? It's not just, just saying that we need this, we need that. At the end of the day, so how much would you need? And sometimes, or more often than not, statisticians were not really very good in budgeting. That's why we had to have the expertise of DBM as well as other consultants in coming up with this expenditure framework. So I think it's one of the improvements of the PSDP, and we hope to implement this, and hopefully DPM will continuously support this come budget call time when they assess or review budget proposals of agencies, particularly in terms of their statistical activities. Secondly, how we are approaching DBM as an NSCB institution given our resource constraints. Basically, our request really is not really on the MOE part or the CO part. Our request really is on the PS, the personal services, because it's really the manpower that we need. We always say that, you know, when we need resources, it's always easy for us to have our friends from the multinational or development community to help us, like UNICEF, UNDP, World Bank, etc. They're always there to help us. But at the end of the day, we would need permanent Rantelia positions who can do sustainable, institutionalized activities. So that's why it's always really the manpower that we are stressing, that we ask for DBM. And right now, recently, I think just 2 weeks ago, we had a courtesy call with DBM, with the new Secretary General, as to have more focused discussions on these issues, and we were informed that really they will support in terms of providing exemptions for hiring of additional manpower to the NSCB, and we look forward to that kind of development.
Okay, how is NSCB discussing with DILG in terms of enhancing the indicators of the local governance performance management system? Maybe this refers to the coordination function.
Enhancing the indicators at the local level. So, more recently, I think the Cabinet Cluster of Human Development and Poverty Reduction mentioned the concern that there are many existing data systems, the LGPMS that mentioned under the DILG, the CPMS also spearheaded by DILG, and the NHTSPR. So it's not only the DILG, how it's being coordinated, but really all these existing databases now being done at the local level. Are all these data systems, information systems talking with each other, or are we just duplicating some things, and then at the end of the day, we're not being cost effective? So that was the request of the Cabinet Cluster then, to make sure that there is a harmonized system to ensure that these are talking with each other. So basically, the NSCB led the TWG and that, and given its recommendations, I believe this is now being spearheaded by DSWD and the NAPC to make sure that the systems are talking to each other, and that it will actually be discussed in the next Cabinet Cluster on Social Development. So it's not really just the LGPMS, but all the other existing data systems.
Okay, there are still a lot of questions here, but
I think I should have gotten 2 muffins.
yeah. But I will not ask them anymore. We'll give this to you, and I think, there are names here, so maybe you can communicate to Director Encarnacion afterwards, maybe tomorrow or some other time. But we have to wrap up this afternoon session. So we are talking about evaluation approaches and methodologies. Saying that it's very diverse would be an understatement. This afternoon and the last set one this morning gives us a good glimpse of what methodologies and approaches are. Very diverse, with contributions from different disciplines. Of course, I will start with statistics, economics, anthropology, sociology, and many others in the development of the framework that leads to these methodologies and approaches. But before we even think about appropriate approaches and methodologies, we have to ask various questions. What impact are we talking about? What are we going to measure? When are we going to measure it? After answering some of those questions, that's the only time that we can contemplate on what approaches and methodologies are we going to adopt from the tons of methodologies and approaches given in the literature. And perhaps as we discussed this afternoon, new methodologies are being published somewhere else, and maybe they might be much better than what we are using right now. But this afternoon and this morning, we have 5 varying methodologies presented to us as to how we go about evaluation. First, on the presentation of Mr. Chowdhury this morning, talks about quasi and experimental designs, and talked about controlled trials, and basically make use of the treatment effect estimation, which is trying to address self-selection bias, and then talks about regression discontinuity models to address the peculiar characteristics of poverty thresholds, and did a lot of econometric modeling exercises. And then Director Encarnacion talks about small error estimation, because many impact evaluation studies are usually done ad hoc, contingent on the project that is being assessed. But the Philippine Statistical System provides a rich database on various aspects of the Philippine society, the households, the business sector, and many others. And all we need to do is get some good statistical tools to bring them down to the level that we are interested in. Like, for example, in 2 years ago, we used data coming from the Philippine Statistical System in assessing the impact of Belgian development project. And instead of going through months of data collection, we just did it in 2 weeks, because we just used statistical tools and analyzed existing data in the Philippine Statistical System. So her illustration on small error estimation is definitely a contribution on how we can make use of the existing data that the government has been spending years and years collecting such data. And then Mr. Montero talks about action research or participatory approach, which is a little bit qualitative in evaluation. And then Dr. Sun talks about pre-MDG and post-MDG poverty reduction comparisons, and talks about econometric assessment in coming up with an evaluation. And then Asek Mateo talks about control versus treatment, and then the double differences, or the before-after control, intervention types of analysis, or the BASAI treatment, and then the propensity score matching, and did some econometric modeling on the long-term impact. So while there were some issues raised on the methodologies used, definitely there's still a lot of things to work on these approaches, and as I said, maybe we can still continue searching for other methodologies, perhaps hybriding some of these existing methodologies to come up with a superior approach in measuring impact or in doing evaluation. With that, I would like to let's express our appreciation for the speakers and the discussants for this very fruitful discussion this afternoon. Thank you.